So this one will be called Transformation Within Stone. And this is kind of an esoteric continuance of that last essay we did on the architecture of the stadium and the function of the stadium as a sort of contrast. I'll call it a Saturnian archetype for the transformation of the soul. As we see in various different human concepts, such as Mecca, such as Heliogabalus's regime in Rome, the Roman Empire, worshiping the stone. There is a quality, you see this a lot in early paganism as well. And you obviously have the Egyptian pyramids are a great example of this as well, additionally. You have this historical worship of the stone, which is the highest density. And again, as we discussed in an artifactual way, it is the longest remaining substance. So when you look at these ancient civilizations and you're looking at the ruins of the Colosseum, or you're looking at the ruins of the ancient Greek temples, you're looking at that which remains the longest physically, materially on Earth. We're looking at like the history of mountains, for instance, and these forms of stone were historically worshipped as entities most proximal with immortality. And the reason why stone and metal and these highly dense material forms are so important in the juxtaposition to what occurs within them is that these are the Saturnian substance of the structure of reality. They symbolize a eternal archetypal play. But what goes on within these Saturnian structures, such as the stadium or the temple or the pyramid, is the drama of the eternal transformation of the human soul, which is the immortal mortality, so to speak. So the figures that I would speak of now are Satchel Paige, Jack Quinn, Babe Ruth, and Walter Johnson, and specifically Babe Ruth and Walter Johnson's kind of final battle in the early 1940s that was raising money for World War II. Actually, the final battle that occurs, and Babe Ruth hits his last home run. Both of them are long retired at this point. Um, this is the idea of time and entropy and the game of baseball in the stadium as a container, like a mountain or a geological monument of time, as the field of eternal movement of life and play. This idea of remaining on the field of creation and remaining within this immortal, eternal stadium, and being identified with the universal, the eternal action and movement of play as the creation of the cosmos, even in entropy and even in time. And furthermore, baseball as this method of keeping time. So I want to talk a little bit about the historical function of Saturn worship, such as Mecca or the pyramids or the Mayan or Aztec temples. These are all world historical, world civilizational, cosmological structures of reality. And the reason that they're all made out of stone or that they resemble mountains or that they themselves work as this epic container of materiality and dense materiality, right? You think of stone, it's a highly dense, heavy, weighted mass and force that remains, right? Even as the human flesh undergoes entropy and corrodes and decays and creates and decreates, you have these eternal structures which are the containers for the epic play of the spiritual journey of transformation of humanity. And these are very sacred containers because they perform mythological, societal, and cultural functions of containing the deep spiritual reality and the existential reality and drama and theater of being human as it unfolds on the cosmological stage of the universe. And even the earth, right, functions in this sense archetypally. So we have historically humanity exists in a Saturn cult, so to speak. And the reason why I use that term is that the Saturn cult is a cult of immortality. You look at this in terms of early alchemy. You look at this in terms of the the journeys of kings and conquistadors, all of whom sought immortality, right? The idea of the fountain of youth, for instance. There's so many historical instances of people who seek power, and what they're really seeking in terms of power in the material world, the three-dimensional, Saturnian, dense, physical world, is that they're seeking immortality, a way to continue forward, being identified with the body. And so the sage or the mystic who performs this function in the temple or in the mountain, right? Mountain caves where Hindu sages would sit and meditate, or the path of Christ where Christ enters the cave, dies, and is reborn, Lazarus, all of these different mythological principles, they enter into Saturn, they enter into the density of incarnation and transform through it. They don't remain tethered to the body or tethered to the appearance of form. They find within the incarnation, within the density, the eternal source of all life itself, which is the primordial spark of existence, which is the transformer within all stars and is the transformer of the universe itself, going all the way back to the creation of this universe, the Big Bang, or whatever sort of name you want to apply to the frictive event which created a heat density expansion, which is the formation of the continuing and turning complexity and expanding of the various different forms that appear within the universe itself. We're talking about the thermodynamic, thermonuclear essence of all life, through which, in the transformer of stars as a metaphysical thermonuclear forge, itself creates different elemental forms, which then recombine and are the building blocks and structure of reality itself. So you see this replicated in Egyptian pyramids, you see this replicated in Greek temples, you see this replicated in the bricks that build and construct cities and towns and houses. You see this replicated in the creation of the modern baseball stadium, right? These are all different world historical ways and forms of resonating with that Saturn process of construction with the building blocks of life. This even goes down to genetics, right? The genetic construction of the interweaving of different chemical compound forms, which are themselves the building blocks of the information of life itself on Earth. Right, the interweaving of the genetic code, which forms and informs the continual creation of the human being and life on Earth through reproduction. Right, the process of creation, destruction, and creation through destruction, which again is the sexual recombination of the life of an organism. So that Saturn archetype runs very deeply in humanity, and it ultimately is a Saturn wound, because you're identifying with the form itself and seeking to perpetuate that form eternally, and thus remaining imprisoned or imprismed in terms of the prism or the aperture of perception of the body, to remain within that forever, which is it's a naturally corroding and corrosive force through entropy, just right through thermodynamic physics. The very nature of the body is it's meant to exist for a period of time, it's experienced, it's observed by the universe, and then it returns to this formless cloud of gases and ash, and then is like stars. The death of a star creates a cloud of ash, right? A cloud of the death of the old form of the star, and then through that cloud, a new star is actually born. So this principle again goes right back to Christ in the cave, and it resembles a lot of the ancient Venusian myths, such as we discussed the descent of Inanna and the descent of Persephone into hell, which is the Plutonic realm. So when we talk about Pluto, we're talking about the transformative essence of all life. We're talking about the real source, the change agent, the actual force of the heat of the will of the universe itself, which is the creationary force and power of all existence, that is pregnant within the density of all appearing and seeming things. So when you have historical Hindu sages, for instance, saying, do not identify with the body is ephemeral, who are you actually? What are you actually? They're asking you to find the source of all consciousness and existence, the state of awareness, which is the creationary force and power of the universe itself. They're asking you to identify with that. And so what's so powerful in terms of baseball history, when you look at Satchel Paige or Jack Quinn or Babe Ruth or Walter Johnson, you're looking at this continued eternal return to the game, even through the process of entropy and the corrosion of the human form. They return to the participation in this epic play and creation within the stadium itself as the structure that holds this power, this impulse, this instinct. They return continually, right? Throughout their lives. Page and Quinn both pitch well into their 50s, and Page into his 60s. Babe Ruth and Walter Johnson return for this sort of last ride um, as a fundraiser for World War II, and have this kind of one last final duel. Both of them at this point being well aged out of the professional game. What it symbolizes is this powerful, powerful creational impulse to return to the site and source and mechanism of play itself. And baseball being, in this way, the most powerful metaphysical vision of creation, reality, and existence. Beneath all of the different mechanisms that perpetuate life, such as reproduction, such as food, metabolism, the undergirdings, which are the biological and chemical foundations of existence, which perpetuate the life of the organism. They are they are in a state of metaphysical connection to the game of baseball as a state of play. Again, Heraclitus says the ion or the eternity is a child playing with colored balls. It couldn't be more precise. The analog there, I believe, is just most directly translates to the planets, right, or the solar system itself, and that the ion is the force of physics and the force of gravity and the force of force itself as the star system, which holds these planets in alignment as they move and spin. This very much so being the force of will applied to baseball, which is the power and the perpetual motion behind the movement of the baseball itself. The force of the pitcher's hand and motion, and the force of the batter's swing and the connection of the bat and the ball. Then you have the fielder going to make that play and make the catch. It's a microcosm, macrocosm relation of the foundational metaphysics of the cosmos itself in terms of solar systems and star systems, which themselves are the galaxies which form the universal network and web of all existence. It's a foundational microcosmic awareness and situating of that principle within everyday life as a cultural mechanism, which connects existence directly with the truth of all being. It's very profound in this way because we're talking about the appearance of forms being a sort of cultural trap or falsity through which so much of human existence becomes caught up in, attempting to achieve immortality or power through the appearance of forms and sustaining forms as a site of power, when in reality, the transformation or the change mechanism, the plutonic hidden within the appearance of existence, within the appearance of Saturn, that itself is the transformative force, which is who we really are and what we really are. It's the force of change, creation, and play, which occurs in the site of the Saturnian. It occurs in the site of the temple or the pyramid or the geological substratum of the earth. So when we talk mythically or mythologically about a figure like Dante and the Inferno cycle, which he creates, it's literally what it's describing is a descent into the bowels of the earth or a descent into incarnation, the descent of spirit into form, and thus holding sway in a Saturnian realm of density and materiality and the appearance of things, a descent into that to discover the ontology of the soul, to discover the self pregnant within materiality, and to retrieve that self, return with that self up to the site of existence, and to participate in existence with that hidden sacral knowledge of the reality and the truth of being beneath the appearance of material things. Beneath the ephemeral is the eternal hidden within the soul of the form. This is the Orphic function in ancient Greece. It's Orpheus descending into hell to find Eurydice and to bring Eurydice back up into the light of day, returned from death, right? So the soul of form as it appears in the world is a materiality of death. It's a flat plane of ephemeral things that come and go and nothing remains. This is the spiritual and cultural nihilism of modernity, because it's lost that epic transfusion of myth. It's lost that descent to discover the source and soul of form. We've taken form to be truth. And this, again, is the cult of Saturn. It's the worship of stone. It's to see what is hidden within the form as opposed to worshiping the form itself, to discover that eternal source and essence of spirit and spiritude, and then thus to participate in reality in a way that is authentically true to the eternal nature of the self, even as the spirit changes forms, even as the spirit changes diameters and apertures of perception. We don't remain imprisoned or imprisoned in a certain perception or mechanism of form. So what's so powerful about what Satchel Paige or Jack Quinn or Babe Ruth or Walter Johnson do is they show us through this eternal return to the game of baseball that they're not even so much identified with the corrosion of the material self as they are identified with the game itself. The practice of this profound metaphysical elucidation of the source and force of play of the creation of the universe, the play of forms and the play of bodies and the play of the appearances of materialities. This site of baseball as a trans-historical site, right, as a profusion of the comings and goings of different human stories, personal stories and lives as they're born and die and are born again within this stadium superstructure of stone, is itself a profoundly spiritual, esoteric phenomenon of the creation, the birth and death of all things, and what remains through them is this tradition and profusion of play, the evolution of play, the creational dynamics of play, which are beneath all appearing seeming seriousness of life and death and survival and existence. This is the essential importance. You think about this Babe Ruth, Walter Johnson showdown, as well as Jack Quinn or Satchel Paige. This is all occurring around the hinge of the philosophical uncovering of not only Heidegger in terms of the ontology of being, but you also have Camus in terms of absurdity, and you have Sartre in terms of existentialism. These are all orbits that are happening around this period of the 1930s to the 1950s and 60s, which actually is the hinge of World War II, and it's also when the planet Pluto is discovered in the sky. Officially, so to speak. It's there. You could say that ancient civilizations and esoteric philosophers knew about Pluto because they knew about this transformative change process. It's even, again, pregnant within the Greek and Roman mythologies and mythological concepts, as well as the esoteric myths which structured these civilizations. But it's quote unquote found astronomically as a astronomical cosmological body in the sky exactly and precisely at this period of time. So we're talking about the absolute heights of popularity of baseball at this moment of time in American history. The 1930s, 40s, and 50s are considered the golden age of baseball, when it's reached its absolute heights of popularity in America as a cultural phenomenon and as a replication of the American spiritual process of transformation, a discovery of this deeper hidden ontology of the foundations of existence, the transformative nature. As Heraclitus again says, you can never step in the same river twice. The transformative nature and essence of the existence of being beneath the appearance of forms, and the crisis, the existential crisis that occurs in modernity in this discovery of the emptiness or the hollowness, as T.S. Eliot would put it, of material existence, and the hyper-fascistic impulses which compel this profound survival instinct that is embedded so deeply within our politics, within our cultures, and within our sociality, so to speak. So what baseball does is it recalls for us back to this Greco-Roman conception, which is itself deeply tied to ancient Hinduism. The discourse there is profound, as well as ancient Egypt, in discussing the profound journey and struggle of finding the soul within form, and how we materialize that as a cultural or civilizational right of participation in existence, which necessarily must transcend the biological, chemical, perceived bounds of being human, and achieve a deeper existential perception of what being human means in a larger cosmological sense. We must, in this way, free ourselves from this ancient cult of Saturn worship, which is the nihilistic worship of form, the worship of ephemerality, and then, as such, total indulgence in things which are not their appearances in veils of truth, as the metaphor of Plato's cave avails us. There's shadows upon the wall of existence, but we ourselves are not perceiving the sun of existence. We're not perceiving the source and force of cosmic will, which impels and changes forms of all things down through the sort of cosmological nesting doll of existence itself, down through the Big Bang, down through the forms of stars, which are forges that create the elements that then become bonded and compounded, and then from that substratum form single-celled life that evolves and mutates and then again coagulates and compounds into newer, different, more complex forms of existence with more complex nervous systems or organ systems, and brains, right? So we're looking at an evolutionary process which descends from this cosmological nesting doll formation. And there's been historically an intuitive apperception of this scientific and cosmological reality, which is the historical metaphysics that founds our ancient civilizations and our ancient cultures and the great works of our ancient philosophical writers and thinkers, who then avail humanity of a real existential spiritual perception of what it is and means to be human beyond the really slavery to Saturn, right? Slavery to stone, as stone to form, and as such, you're acting out unconsciously the just the eternal return to the body and identification with the body and all of these different biological and chemical compellings, which are really just survival mechanisms which exist to continue to scaffold humanity and nature on top of itself. These basic natural processes, which themselves are life in an indubitable foundational way, but they are life that is identified with the form of the body, as the body is the nature to transform. It's the nature to change. So to find that deeper nature to change within the self and within the body is to descend within incarnation and to participate in this eternal dance, in this eternal art of play and creation and change, but not in an unconscious way as in a worship of Saturn. So to get a little deeper into this, right, Paige and Quinn and Ruth and Johnson, these are all human beings, but through their participation with baseball, they acquire this eternal archetypal play in this dance of creation, in that they become so identified with the game of baseball. Their entire lives revolve around this participation in this epic, deeply indigenous rite of cultural play, which is availed of us in the stadium architecture, the theatrical architecture of the temple or the pyramid, which are our existential rites, our metaphysical spiritual rites, which connect us directly to creation in a primordial foundational way, not in a secondary way, as in participation through the conventional human mechanism of metabolism, reproduction, etc. These are foundational methods, but what's necessary through culture is symbolic transformation of those foundational methods into an active instrumental will through which we actively create and thus participate in and with the foundational will of creation. It's a dialectical redoubling, to use Kierkegaard's terms, a dialectical redoubling of the force of creation, a way of holding up a mirror and reflecting upon the foundations of our very existential existence beyond the bounds of the species level form of being human and into a metaphysical superstructure, into a cosmological revelation where we actually become identified with that which we actually are, the universe, the eternal, the force of creation itself. So this is just, it's incredibly profound, but we need that cultural profusion. We need that mythological superstructure of the stadium or the temple as the fields of this sacred esoteric rite for us to become in this way more than human, for us to become ancient primordial cosmological beings and no longer strictly identified with this template that is unconsciously availed us this Saturn form through which we are desperate for survival, and in this way, animals becoming conscious through the through the esoteric, metaphysical, symbolic ritual of identifying with the field of play and the field of creation, beyond and prior to, a priori to, the creation of humanity, right? As a structure of chemicals and genetics, as a structure of evolved brain and organ and bone and blood, right? To become identified with that a priori structure of the creation of the universe itself, we ourselves are plugged directly back into that essential primordial substance of existence. But we need that cultural right. We need that cultural symbolic right to give us that form of play and that form of art, which is transcendental in the sense that it is both human and beyond human. It is through our humanity, through the mechanism of our humanity, that we participate in something that is beyond human, in terms of that it transcends and is transcendental of the traditional human impulse. And it transforms the traditional human impulse through the force of will, creation, and play into an aesthetic participation in the art of transformation, which then avails us of the truth of existence, and we are actively participating in the truth of that existence. This is the historical function of myth. It's the historical function of culture as the ground of everything important that happens in a human sense, because it allows us to become cosmological beings beyond this sort of this cloak of humanity that we wear, which is the structure of Saturn, which is reproduction, food, survival, the animal form of the ephemeral, which necessarily must come and go, and it's a brief aperture of our experience, the perception of our experience. To plug that perceptive mechanism into the larger superstructure of a cultural right that delivers us into this existential perception of the cosmological function of creation itself, the force of will itself, is to elevate humanity into a eternal, the realm of the eternal, the realm of the cosmological whole, the universal whole, and to participate in that mythic spiritual time, and thus actually truly become immortal in the Plutonic sense of eternally transforming, participating in the change maker, the transformer of all existence itself, plugging into that existential primordial function of the will itself, directly plugging into that outlet, as opposed to circumstantially being retrofitted into it by the culture and biology of the human body itself, and thus unconsciously participating in it. We have to raise it to the form of consciousness through a cultural rite, which is the symbolic unveiling of creation proper, the force of will proper. We have to activate the force of will into the into that. I don't know how to describe this. It's activating the force of will consciously through the symbolic architecture, right, of the sport of baseball as a rite, as a stadium mechanism through which we descend into and perform a theater of creation, a theater of existence, which is the mythological function of all historical civilizations. A theater through which the veil is pulled back from our eyes and we experience the creation directly through our symbolic archetypal participation in the movement of creation itself, as opposed to living in this slumber of the human body and the human form where we act out these chemical and biological directives, and as such are unconscious witnesses to this real kind of esoteric underpinning of all life and existence itself. And this is why culture is so important and myth is so important across all world civilizations. We need that symbolic mirror through which we can perform the function of creation. We can activate the force of will through a totally aesthetic realm. In that totally aesthetic realm, that realm of the coming and going of forms, this participation in the eternal structure of the stadium or the creational game or art of life, the dance and play of the young child with the colored balls in the grand ionic sense, activates our perception of that which we truly are. It raises us into consciousness of the transformative mechanism hidden within the ephemeral structures, the ephemeral forms, which construct the appearance of what seems to be. And this is the existential key at this hinge point of modernity, which is the 30s, 40s, and 50s, the golden age of baseball, World War II, and the discovery of Pluto. It's the hinge point to see what is deeper beneath all of these appearances of that which we conceive to be and have structured our modern society off of. We've structured our modern society in and from this hyper material, hyper sort of anthropomorphic perception of reality. How can we use these structures that appear to be? And as such, we've invested ourselves so much in the appearance of structure that we've forgotten this ancient mythic primordial impulse, which is innate to humanity, to discover the real existential form of existence, the formless form beneath the appearance, hidden within the stone, right? The descent into form, the incarnation, hidden within that descent is something mythic, archetypal, eternal, and changing, eternally recurring in the form of the source itself, but changing in terms of the way that it appears to be, the way that it dies, is born, and is reborn again. So our perception of that is our ability to elevate all of life and all of existence into the realm of the mythic, archetypal, and eternal, and thus have a transformative experience of being human itself. That's what I got. I'll catch you all in the next one.